This is the Conscious Mental Health Podcast for curious clients and conscious clinicians. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered health or mental health advice. We are back with part 2 of our series investigating therapy first and gender exploratory therapy. Before we fully get into it, again, I'm Juniper, licensed clinical social worker, mental health educator.
I'm Laurel. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a mental health educator.
If you haven't watched part 1, we highly suggest that you do, because
go back and watch it. You're going to be confused.
In part 1, we talked a lot about therapy first and gender exploratory therapy. We went through their clinician's guide and talked about the webinars that we watched and like a lot about the training and what their model of gender exploratory therapy. We decided to make this into a 3-part series, but it will probably end up having to do extra shows.
Oh, we'll be back with more than 3 parts. This is just the 3 parts that we initially recorded.
Exactly, because even yesterday, we're discovering more information and learning more and reading more. So it just never ends.
No, it never ends. And we wanted to do our due diligence. There are, as you said, well, it's just so many pieces that we're uncovering every single day that when we initially recorded it, we did the best we could. And now there is so much more information that we want to make sure is in there that we include, that it makes things more clear and specific. So that's what we're going to be doing some of today, as well as jumping on in with some little extras every once in a while.
Yeah. So you'll see post-editing us coming on in and adding clarification points or just something that we couldn't not say out loud to you all.
Couldn't not say.
We couldn't.
Had
we
to
just
do it.
had to do it.
And we also want to, as we did with part 1 episode, just give a content warning for this episode as well. We are going to be discussing some things that could be really difficult to hear, and that could include things like transphobia and pathologizing of trans identity, conversion therapy, and some other tough topics that even extend beyond that. Like, we're going to be referencing racism and possibly referencing anti-Semitism. Like, this web extends into lots of different areas. And so please just take good care of yourself, knowing that that is going to be the content of this episode in many ways. But now we are going to talk about some of the people. Juniper has been waiting on the edge of her seat to talk about the people. So who is the first, and I would argue not most important, but most prominent or loudest figure, one of the folks that started a lot of these organizations?
Hello there, I'm Stella O'Malley and I'm a psychotherapist. I'm based in Ireland.
Before we get into all of her roles that she plays in all the organizations, I wanted to talk about how she got started in this work.
Yeah.
So from what I understand from listening to interviews and reading Inventing Transgender Children and Young People, in which Stella has a chapter, which is recommended in one of the bazillions of websites that I was like, what are your resources? Let me look at them. Stella talks a lot about her experience growing up. Stella said that she was a lost, lonely, very sad child, that she was also very weird. She likes to describe herself as like very odd, very weird. Everybody in her village knew her, or town, whatever, and that she insisted she was a boy starting from about the age of 3. And the way she describes her insisting of being a boy is that she was strong, the biggest, the best fighter in town, and that she didn't want to wear girl clothes. She wanted to wear boy clothes, wanted to play sports. She said people would ask her, are you a girl or a boy? And she'd be like, I'm a boy. And Stella talks about the fact that this was in the 70s in Ireland and that no one would listen to her or support her in that.
Which absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
Historically. Like,
right.
Probably was not openly supported in the 70s.
Yeah. In Stella's mind, it was because, well, there was just no such thing as trans. It was not invented, by the radical left. So that no one paid attention to her. And the way the story goes is that she hit puberty, had a sexual awakening, and was fine with being a girl. And now she's a mom and she loves being a woman.
I went through a kid thing and then I came out of it. So I'm incredibly glad I didn't get the opportunities that children of my ilk would now get. And I would have sailed the 7 seas to take puberty blockers as a kid. I would exactly what I wanted. Anything to stop this would have been my attitude. But I didn't have those opportunities, and I ended up becoming comfortable, which is arguably the human journey.
I think this is really important because it makes sense that Stella is so concerned with protecting children. She says for her that if there's any chance that any other child is like her and that just needs to go through puberty and get over it, and this is a very common theme, watchful waiting. We've talked about this. They just need to get over the hump. They just need to get through until they're a little older.
They need to have their sexual awakening. Stella is very focused on puberty, and you will hear her if you listen to her talk and you listen to a lot of her content, she is very adamant that children going through puberty is the answer.
Oh, yeah.
To this quote unquote problem.
Yes. So she has this personal experience, but it doesn't seem that she was interested in gender very much until she writes that she read an article that just lit her on fire. I'm using her words, not mine.
I was reading a newspaper in a cafe, and I saw this off-the-wall story about Cyril Doty, who had fought the Canadian government for the right to register. Cyril Doty is a they, them, non-binary person, and they fought the Canadian government and won for the right to register their child as you, neither male nor female, but you, which could stand for unknown or unassigned. And I put down the paper and I thought, this is mad.
She could not understand why this family would do this. And that was why she decided to start getting in this work. She said that immediately upon reading that article and learning that children were being trapped in the wrong body, that she would inwardly grimace because of her own experience, and she immediately got down to it. And I don't know how she did this, because she was immediately like doing documentaries and getting on the news. And so she was on 2 parenting shows, and I don't know if that was before or after, but she did participate in a documentary film. It was her film called Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. And she says that it's because if other kids might be having an experience like she had, then they're not getting the help or support they need in a gender affirmative model. Now, it's very clear from when I started learning about Stella that she actually didn't have a lot of experience with gender affirmative model or gender in therapy in general. She was more focused on parenting. She's written multiple books about parenting. And I just find it interesting that she immediately was critical without even really ever being trained or have had worked in the field prior to this. Interesting. And I know we're going a little more in depth here than we will with anyone else, but I think it's really important because Laurel and I talked about the origin stories of a lot of people that we've uncovered. And it's like, why did they become interested in this in the first place?
Right.
I think that Stella's origin story is very telling.
Yeah, I think it is very telling.
Now, our favorite part.
What organizations is Stella involved in specifically?
Stella is the founder and executive director of guess, GenSpect. She's the founder of the Killarney Group, which is a think tank. We haven't talked about that one, but it is to develop alternative guidelines to the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH standards of care. And here's a clip of Stella talking about the Killarney Group.
WPATH is an organisation that was started in the late 70s, and they were kind of a motley group of trans people and professionals who were working in the area. And they were created to promote transgender health, to help people who were transitioning. But by the early 2000s, they were overtaken by activists. Gender ideology just creeping everywhere, from cats to schools to young children. Because WPATHs, their entire kind of way of operating is #NoDebate. They don't debate, they shut people down, they absolutely defame people, or certainly they make very little of an awful lot of people's reputations. And as a result, arguably an awful lot of people have been cowed and silenced. And so we started to say, well, we're going to have to offer something, and we're going to have to go head to head with them. And we have created as you said, a think tank that kind of is putting what we think are the best minds together to talk about gender in a more rational way and in a healthier way, because our approach to gender is a healthy approach to sex and gender, i.e. create a framework where people can be diverse. Maybe little boys can run around in dresses, but nobody wants to call him a girl, and nobody is making him take puberty blockers or offering a fast track of a medicalised pathway. And so we're creating a gender care framework, and we're going to release it as such at our next conference.
Then we have SEGM. We also have Thoughtful Therapist, and I don't think we mentioned that one. Stella is a founding member of Thoughtful Therapist, and guess what they do? It is a group established to ensure that the proposed conversion therapy bans are basically not going to get in the way of the nuances of therapy, aka gender exploratory therapies. They're trying to fight against conversion therapy
Hold
bans.
up. Are they saying that they're afraid conversion therapy bans are going to mess up their work?
Oh, she talks about it all the time.
Because they're not, according to them, they're not conversion therapy. So
Oh, no.
if a conversion therapy ban is put in place, why would they be afraid that it's going to interfere with their work?
This is a clip of some of the therapists with Thoughtful Therapists talking about the memorandum in the UK to ban conversion therapy. Very briefly, the Memorandum of Understanding on Conversion Therapy in the UK is a collaborative publication, and it's a joint document signed by over 25 health, counseling, and psychotherapy organizations, which aims to end the practice of conversion therapy in the UK. That's why Thoughtful Therapist joined forces, mostly therapists and psychotherapists in the UK and beyond, to, I guess, oppose this memorandum. There's a ton of supporters for this memorandum: the British Association of Gender Identity Specialists, British Association of Arts and Therapists, Association of Christians in Counseling and Linked Professionals, also the Royal College of Psychiatrists and the Royal College of General Practitioners. And the list just goes on and on. And so we're going to just talk a little bit about their views on why we should be cautious about banning conversion therapies. Let's hear what they have to say.
My big fear for the MOU2, and it's kind of obviously happening, is that lots of therapists feel constricted. Lots of therapists feel that they can't explore other issues. And some therapists are going ahead and saying, well, as an ethical therapist, I need to explore issues. As Bob Withers said, some therapists work very much on the basis of the unconscious, and that's their job, that's their training. So if you want to provide a proper therapeutic process to somebody, you should kind of bring in your entire training, your experience, the ethics of your accreditation body, and then you see the whole person in front of you. The very fact that we've had the need to put forward this conference to discuss it, to bring kind of thoughtful therapists together and say, can we discuss this? It seems to be silencing therapists. And anything that's silencing or restricting therapists has an issue. And so what we need to do is discuss it. And that's the concept of us being here today.
There's a lot to unpack there, but the main points were that somehow practicing, for example, with this psychodynamic lens could be considered conversion. That's interesting. That's never come up in any of my training, that something I would be doing if I was practicing from a psychodynamic lens would be converting someone from their gender or sexual identity. That's so weird. So we have Thoughtful Therapists. So they're all about trying to make sure that conversion bans are lifted. And guess what? They have been. They're getting lifted left and right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all to make space for exploratory therapy for trans youth.
Right.
Therapy First, obviously co-founder. The Institute for Comprehensive Gender Dysphoria Research. She is a fellow, also listed as the vice president in their financial paperwork, along with Lisa Littman and Lisa Marciano.
She also is the co-host of Gender Wider Lens podcast with another individual that we'll talk about in a minute.
She's on the Clinical Advisory Network on Sex and Gender. She's on the advisory board. She is in the International Association of Therapists for Desisters and Detransitioners, and also the Gender Dysphoria Support Network in collaboration with GenSpect. and then Wider Lens Consulting.
With the Wider Lens Consulting, that is sister business of their Wider Lens podcast. Again, she's a contributor, a regular contributor to different media outlets and organizations, both in Ireland and other places as well. She's been featured quite frequently on Megyn Kelly's show. So she really has her hand in a lot of different things, not just how many of those organizations in this web. In total, from what we could find, at least 18 different groups and organizations in this web.
Yeah.
She is either a leader or, like in the ones Juniper outlined, or at least affiliated with them. 18 different of these organizations. I will say, like, Stella is a very interesting character because if you listen to some of how she talks and some of the ways that she speaks about her work and her beliefs, I mean, I think we all bump up against this sometimes, but she contradicts herself just like so often. I mean, obviously she's very involved in this work and she seems really like assertive about all of these beliefs, but then as you kind of listen to some of the things she says, there are so many contradictions. So it's really.
Did you find any examples?
Yeah.
Play the clip. We have found a few clips that we're going to use to illustrate some of the contradictions that occur quite frequently with Stella and a lot of these players in the game.
On the surface, we have to be affirming, because that's already really strange.
This next clip is from Gender: A Wider Lens, the podcast that we have talked about. They are interviewing this person who is a therapist, and I guess that they were upset because they were told to affirm one of their young clients' identity.
Surface, we have to be affirming, because that's already really strange.
No, it wasn't. It was. Go ahead. Were you going to say something, Stella?
Yeah, I'm going to add something. To agree with a person who says that they identify as a wounded male dog is to collude with the dehumanization of a person, if you follow me.
A child. Specifically.
You're colluding with the fact that they're dehumanizing themselves. And that's a fundamental harm to a human, to a child, to a human. And that's where we have to bring our humanity.
I think that this argument, this humanization, dehumanization argument is interesting of Stella to employ here because there's a lot of flaws, but also, again, it relies on this false equivalency. So first of all, if you want an example of a straw man argument, this is a perfect one. This argument misrepresents the position of those who support gender-affirming care by throwing in the straw man. It assumes that everyone who uses someone's pronouns, preferred pronouns, is automatically agreeing with every aspect of their identity, including potentially what some could see as bizarre claims, like identifying as a wounded dog. And that is a false equivalency. Just because someone uses a pronoun doesn't mean they agree with every aspect of what they're saying or identity. Or if I validate your experience, then that means I'm agreeing with it. Well, that is not true. I talk about that a lot in my work, that validation doesn't mean agreeing. It means you're saying that their experience is valid to them in that moment. It does not equate agreeing. Oh, I hate that one. Using pronouns is a basic act of respect, really, and doesn't imply endorsement of every aspect of someone's identity. Furthermore, it falsely equates the use of pronouns with dehumanization in this particular instance. I mean, I see where she's coming from when she wants to say that, like how you're colluding with this harmful narrative. But come on, you guys, let's be real here. Just because you say, I see where you're coming from, or just because you say, yeah, you're really feeling upset right now, or, oh, yes, I recognize that frustration, doesn't mean that you are saying that you're the one to blame or that that person might not feel differently later. Sometimes you can be really upset about something and then 5 minutes later you can say, oh, actually I was overreacting a bit. And the reality is that the more you argue against the way someone's experiencing something in the moment, the more they're going to come back with arguing for the status quo because people want to be heard. They want to be understood. And last but not least, there's a subtle kind of denial of autonomy here of like, oh my gosh, this child says they're a wounded dog. And if you say they're a wounded dog, then you are actively participating in their delusion. They say this all the time, but I mean, not wounded dog, of course, but they say that about using someone's pronoun that they would like to be used. In my view, in this case, that child is expressing distress. I mean, come on, they're really into psychoanalysis, like wounded dog. Wow. That's an image that really feels powerful. Instead of denying right away, "Oh, you're not a dog. Quit saying you're a dog." Maybe say, "You feel wounded. You feel wounded. What's it like? How do you see yourself as a wounded dog?" I mean, hello, have you ever heard of like sand tray or play therapy or expressive therapy or narrative therapy? Like, there's so many ways of approaching this without colluding with some delusion. Like, I just don't understand these therapists. Okay. I wanted to just throw out a few gems. We'll
Yeah.
see if this makes the episode.
Sure.
Stella also has a Substack, which she writes a bunch of blogs. And so I found one thing from her Substack article, and I was like, she said,
okay.
girls on testosterone can be frighteningly aggressive, and their temper tantrums often turn violent on themselves and on their loved ones. The level of parental abuse that is happening among families who have been impacted by gender dysphoria remains an unacknowledged dark secret. The parents are devastated. They just want their kids back, and they're clinging on by their fingernails to the relationship, afraid that if they let go, they will never get it back.
I guess
Parental abuse.
it's like odd to it's odd to me. Like, how many clients has she worked with who are undergoing hormone therapy and beating up on their parents? I haven't. I mean, I know it's not all about personal experience, but I've definitely worked with clients who are undergoing HRT, and that has never been a concern that's been brought to me. When she makes it seem like this is happening constantly, like it's just some sort of an epidemic.
Yeah.
And I've literally never witnessed that ever.
We're done with Stella for now.
Okay. So our next friend that we want to talk a little bit about is Sasha Ayad. And so Sasha is another prominent figure in these communities. She is a clinical therapist. She has a private practice here in the States, and it is solely focused on work with teens and young people and gender. She, however, does have some kind of an affiliation with at least 15 of the organizations involved in this web, including GenSpect, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, Rethink Identity Medicine Ethics, Gender Exploratory Therapy Association, which is now Therapy First, Sex Matters, Institute for Comprehensive Gender Dysphoria Research, Pediatric and Adolescent Gender Dysphoria Working Group, Gender Dysphoria Support Network, Gender A Wider Lens Podcast, Beyond WPATH, Stats for Gender, Wider Lens Consulting, Thoughtful Therapists, and Critical Therapy Antidote. Is involved in some form or fashion in all of those organizations. So she is definitely a player in this, in quite a bit of it. Yeah.
Play clip.
You know, playing with whatever the less likely you are potentially to develop this problem.
Yeah, I think we've really intertwined sex and gender expression in a way that doesn't make sense. Don't lie to him about his body and his biology, right? He's a boy, and boys can express themselves in lots of different ways. And puberty's coming. And when puberty comes, here are some of the changes that will happen to you.
You know, Sasha her origin story really began because she was working in a school, and she actually started the Gay Straight Alliance at this school where she worked. And And she is really a proponent of this social contagion theory and rapid onset gender dysphoria work, because she makes a lot of connections to these kiddos that she worked with at that school and associating their gender dysphoria with the rapid onset gender dysphoria social contagion of their peers.
A lot of what's unsaid among at least Stella and Sasha a lot in their podcast, but they do have guests that are gender critical feminist or exclusionary of any trans identified human. I wonder if Sasha holds any of those values.
Well, she's involved in Sex Matters, which is a TERF organization.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Coming out and socially or medically transitioning means you are stopping your birth sex identity in its tracks. When you begin curating a new identity in the other sex role or in a non-binary role, you're sort of dodging the responsibilities and the type of maturation that would have been right around the corner for you in your birth sex identity. If you're a girl, then you don't want to become an adult woman. And if you're a boy, you don't want to become an adult man. The difference between childhood onset gender dysphoria and rapid onset gender dysphoria, but we kind of explain that. We talk about the study, we talk about the kind of co-occurring issues that can happen with ROGD.
Your kid knows. Your kid may know better than you do. And we should just be trusting these children and offering this so-called affirming care. Go ahead.
And frankly, when a kid is very young, they believe what adults tell them. So, if you tell a child that's female, you are really a boy. And don't worry, when puberty comes, we'll take care of it with puberty blockers and you won't have to deal with that. And when you get old enough, you can have this or that medical intervention and surgery. I mean, kids will believe what we tell them.
I grew up in a very cis-normative home, indoctrinated with cis-normative things, and somehow it just doesn't work for me. So what? I don't think you could have got more cis-normative in my house.
Yeah.
I mean, I was beaten within an inch of my life sometimes, and if I was going to get the shit knocked out of me and the cis knocked back into me, it surely didn't work for me.
A lot of the therapists in Therapy First rely on psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory as their main orientation. And I would say that Lisa Marciano, probably the most accomplished Jungian analyst of the bunch. If you look up her website, what's really interesting is that gender is not even on her official, like her personal website. It's, for example, her latest book, The Vital Spark, Reclaim Your Outlaw Energies and Find Your Feminine Fire. Look at that. Look at that cover.
I actually don't. I mean, I don't know if I didn't know anything.
I'd be into it.
And I saw that, I would be like, okay, let's do it, Lisa. Let's find our.
I mean, look at that necklace. Lisa looks like basically every therapist of that age, white therapist of the age.
Yeah.
She has another podcast. It's about depth psychology, which is called This Jungian Life, which I admit that I have listened to, not in research for this. It had come up in other research for mental health when I was looking into depth psychology. She's the faculty of the Carl G. Jung Institute of Philadelphia, which is where she lives, lectures, and also has her practice. Okay. There's a lot about dreaming. She has a fairy tale group and a dreaming group, which is like,
sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, Carl Jung.
I think I would like
101. Yeah, first discovered or heard Lisa in the webinar for the Training for Therapy First. And it's through an organization that we actually hadn't listed, FAIR, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. Well, doesn't that sound interesting? But their very first tagline on their website is Overcoming Identity Politics.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so remember what you said earlier?
Whistle. Remember the dog whistle conversation we had, you all? That's a great example of a dog whistle.
Yeah, that's all we need to say about that. So anyhow, I was listening to Lisa and I was like, yes, definitely sounds like the most therapy therapist. I was like, well, how is Lisa involved in all this stuff? But then guess what? Looking into the financial reports, Lisa's the secretary. Lisa's the deputy director. Lisa's the vice president. What is going on? Lisa, your website isn't telling me all of this.
That is fascinating that she doesn't put it quite as directly out there as some of these other folks, that she's so deeply involved, but she doesn't advertise it in the same way.
Yeah.
Because, you know, a lot of these other folks, that's like their identity, talking
Right.
identity.
Right.
Like this work is how they like brand themselves to the world. And so it's really fascinating that Lisa does not do that.
Oh, want to hear something interesting?
I do.
Lisa Littman, our good friend who basically created ROGD, credited Marciano by name in the acknowledgments of that paper for writings that promote rapid onset gender dysphoria. She was using some of Lisa's writing in order to support rapid onset gender dysphoria. And I'm going to kind of read a few parts of the chapter that she wrote in Inventing Transgender Children and Young People.
So TransMap said that thing about she's likely a key figure behind youth trans critical professionals. And I Googled it, and that's the old name. Do you know what the new name for it is?
Youth trans critical professionals. Thoughtful therapist. No. Oh God. Critical therapy antidote.
No.
Oh God. Radical center.
Which one is it?
Beyond trans. Oh, the trans
Transgender
trend.
Trend.
What?
That's their new name.
That was our bonus round. So here is the riveting writings that Lisa Littman credited as part of her understanding of rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Okay.
And this is chapter 3 in Inventing Transgender Children and Young People, entitled Transgender Children, the Making of a Modern Hysteria. The making of modern hysteria. So I don't even think we need to go much further into how that was helpful in developing ROGD using social contagion. When you think of modern hysteria or hysteria in general, what comes to your mind?
Well, since she's a Jungian, I think of actual hysteria, which was Freudian originally. Am I correct in saying that? And how it was used as a way to oppress women because it was a theory that like women were just crazy.
Yeah.
Big quotes.
Yeah.
Because of their womb.
Mhm.
I'm sure that has, I think that has like earlier roots even than Freud, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I also think of like moral panic. This is not the first time an issue has been used to create like this panic, this sort of like,
oh, we're going to get into that.
Singled out epidemic of a moral panic.
Right. And what's interesting about Lisa is, again, remember how we like might want to go to one of her events about fairy tales? I don't think that everything Freudian and Jungian is to be dismissed.
No, I actually really like some
I know.
Jungian stuff.
Yeah.
I do.
So, and that being said, just like we have been discussing, you don't have to dismiss everything about a theory or an idea just because it doesn't fit for everyone.
Absolutely.
Hint, hint. But the main premise is that there is basically societal sanctioned symptoms that change as society changes. So at the time, the hysteria symptoms were one's psyche attempting to express distress and ask for help. This idea, which frankly, I have read a lot about, and there's some validity to the idea that different cultures or societies have different ways of expressing distress.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
That's like, I think pretty well understood and welcome. Isn't that kind of a basic foundation of like cultural competency training?
They take this idea and run with it. She uses one person's writing around the hysteria and makes links and connections to gender dysphoria. So I'm going to read this quote. Is it wrong to put childhood gender dysphoria in the same category as 19th century hysterics, late 20th century anorexics, and victims of satanic ritual abuse? I do not believe that it is.
Oh, she's referencing satanic panic too, even though we know that wasn't really a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
She says that she will acknowledge that acute gender dysphoria has always been with humanity. She doesn't refute the idea that it can exist. She always is going to say that it's a pathology, but she doesn't refute it. But she says that, for example, in the late 20th century, like eating disorders, that everybody had one all of a sudden because it was being publicized. The media was talking about it, like how harmful it can be. People that were suffering with an ED, such as anorexia, were seen as people that were worthy of care and like, look, concern. And so her idea is that people see that and they're like, yeah, I'm a little distressed. I think I'll do that too. She also then further says that it's a disconnection between the mind and the body, the collective consciousness expressing itself in its complete disembodiment through this particular symptom. Now, Lisa, I agree with you. I think that there is a collective consciousness that could be acutely aware of the mind body relationship, or like the ripping that of apart, and also abuses and traumas that have been inflicted upon the body. I can see that.
Sure.
But
I don't dismiss that either.
To link it to gender dysphoria, aka trans identity or gender nonconforming identity, I think it's a stretch. But again, she goes on and on and on, and she loves to talk about how the psyche is never silent. It's always speaking.
Well, okay, again, I also don't disagree with that. I think that's the thing. Like,
Yeah.
maybe hysteria, air quote, big scare quotes, hysteria is a communication.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a collective consciousness that is acknowledging something. But I still don't get the connection unless you're going with the social contagion theory.
That she loves to reference Showalter. I tried to find Showalter, but it's like I was up all night reading this, not because it was good, but because I was like, I couldn't stop.
Not because it was good.
Yeah, I was like, what? Just because I really feel that she's co-opting so much of these ideas that are prominent within our field, within depth psychology, we'll say. So she said there's 3 main ingredients: physician enthusiast and theorist, unhappy vulnerable patients, and supportive cultural environments. Think about it. They believe that medical professionals are hopping on the bandwagon because they want to help people, and that there's unhappy vulnerable people that want to be helped, and that the culture supports it. They're like, hey, yes, you do this. So they really are making this case that it's just a cultural trend and that there'll be a new one coming up next year.
I mean, well, I disagree. I don't think it's a trend. I go back to throughout human history, we have made progress on understanding human behavior and neurobiology and concepts about being human. And so expanding on our understanding of what it is to be a person is not a trend. It's just expanding our understanding.
Laurel, that's progressive ideology.
Okay.
You are really threatening social norms that have been well established.
Well,
what else, Laurel, I find very fascinating is this framing that being trans is cool. She said, quote, framing adopting a trans identity isn't merely a legitimate option in the symptom pool, but a valorized one. It's a way to transcend the ordinary to become something special and unique. And this is in the same line when they talk about how it's a way to like become a whole new person and to get out of this like miserable life that you're in. So you can be a whole new person because you hate yourself.
I mean, it sounds the same as when people, well, you're choosing to be gay so that you can be special. I don't know. It's not a choice.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a choice.
It's not a choice, and it's hard.
Well, that's the thing, like to promote it as something that people are choosing because they want to be special, or they want to be like that it's an easy thing to do, when we over and over again understand and have heard so many lived experiences that like if somebody could have not chosen this, they wouldn't have. Like that it's not an easy life in any capacity in the world that we live in. Like it's a very hard road.
Why would someone take hormones and get surgery? Like transsexualism is pretty hardcore. Like there's
Not anymore. These days,
No,
it's totally a non-big deal. It's like taking vitamins.
I'm just saying, like, I know socially what you're saying, but like realistically, it's hardcore. Physically, it's intense, and the people who do it are often experiencing strong distress.
So like, why It just doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Like, we talked about this before we were recording, but like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we reaching so hard and creating all of these like weird back doors into this way of being when maybe that's just a way of being?
We're all going to learn that when we talk about politics in part 3.
Spoiler alert. Sorry, I went too far ahead, but I can't help it.
She says that the medical and mental health field must guard against becoming entranced by exotic new conditions such that in our excitement, we unconsciously reinforce maladaptive behaviors. That one got me because I don't know if you all remember in part 1, but we did talk about how Donald Trump and a lot of people that espouse that ideology said that this is a brand new invention by the radical left just a few years ago. Sasha said, she even said the word exotic. It's like they're just reading each other's freaking articles to each other.
I'm sorry, it just makes me laugh so hard when he says it was just invented just a few years ago. And I'm just like, what? I don't know.
Yeah, I did a real deep dive into Lisa, but I think it's not just her. It's that psychoanalytic approach to validate ROGD. Does that make sense? Which is the main point of focus for advocacy. One of the main ones. Mm-hmm. So we are done with that.
Bye, Lisa.
Bye. We do have Robert DiAngelo. The only thing we need to say about Robert DiAngelo is that the founder and listed as the director of SEGM, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, and that their background is a Australian psychiatrist who came to the US. And guess what? He got his doctorate and trained in Jungian psychoanalysis. And his whole deal is basically that he goes in the route of saying that we're treating psychiatry and psychology from an over-medicalized approach. So that's how they're weaseling their way into saying medical interventions are wrong or dangerous, and uses a lot of evidence, again, kernel of truth, that there is over-medicalization in a lot of instances. So Robert DiAngelo was one of the trainers of Therapy First webinar. So Robert DiAngelo's chapter of Inventing Transgender Children and Young People is called Psychiatry and the Ethical Limits of Gender-Affirming Care. So again, angle. This is in the first opening paragraph. Brunskill Evans, who also wrote a chapter of this book, has argued that the concept of the transgendered child is a newly created concept, an entirely new way of thinking about what it means to be human that previously did not exist. The reason why they say that a lot is just to support their idea that there's not enough medical evidence, that they don't have enough longitudinal research, that this is new. They just started using these type of medical interventions for children, like HRT, like puberty blockers for trans children. So I believe that saying all of that is social contagion and to support the fact that there's lack of evidence, because this is DiAngelo is all about the medical side of things.
It's kind of covering all bases to support those theoretical concepts.
And the thing that really bothers me is that he talks a lot in this chapter that we aren't looking at the entire context of the child, which I find ridiculous. Obviously, because we've done this real work, actually. Again, the dichotomy is that you either look at it from a medical perspective or from a biopsychosocial spiritual perspective. There's nothing in between.
No crossover in that Venn diagram.
But wait a minute. Biopsychosocial spiritual, the bio is in there.
Interesting.
But you can't leave out one whole system.
Well, apparently you can. That was me being sarcastic. I know you can.
All right, we're going to look at 2 clips of Roberto DiAngelo. And just very quickly, I want to mention that we have used the name Robert and Roberto. And I believe that is because other people refer to him as Robert. And so I don't know if that's a nickname, but his legal name is Roberto DiAngelo. First, we're going to watch Roberto do the welcome and opening remarks at the first international conference that SEGM put on. And then we're going to watch another clip.
SEGM is a relatively new organization, so I'd like to say a few words about us. SEGM is a registered non-profit organization, free from political, ideological, religious, or financial influences.
That's hilarious.
We formed in 2019 in response to the sharply increasing numbers of children, adolescents, and young adults who reported gender dysphoria and were seeking help from medical professionals. At that time, we noticed that the field of gender medicine was not operating according to the principles of evidence-based medicine. The prevailing treatment guidelines for youth were not, and still are not, based on quality systematic reviews of the evidence. The quality of the treatment guidelines remains therefore poor overall, and these guidelines do not adhere to the principles of evidence-based medicine. Clinicians practicing evidence-based medicine know that recommendations and guidance that do not use the best current evidence risk promoting suboptimal or even harmful care. While SEGM is a non-membership organisation, we collaborate with more than 100 clinicians worldwide on a range of projects aimed at our core mission, raising the bar on the quality of evidence in youth gender medicine.
All right. That's all we're going to play from that, but we will link this so you can watch the whole thing should you choose.
So now at this point, we are going to introduce and talk about some other key players that are involved in multiple of these organizations. And we also will note that we recognize it kind of is hard to see our beautiful board with all their faces. And so we have a Google Drive that we will link if you want to be able to look at those up closer to your face and read more about them in depth.
Yes.
Erin Friday is a team member of GenSpec. She is an attorney, and she co-leads a regional group of Our Duty. It's another affiliated organization for a lot of these folks. She's a former leader of Parents of Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoric Kids. And her bio states that she's heavily involved in legislative advocacy, frequently working in Sacramento to propose and oppose bills related to gender interventions for minors. She's also a contributor to, and again, this is all directly from her bio. I did not look any of this up to add. She's a contributor to the Daily Signal, the Epoch Times, PragerU, and Post Millennial.
Did you say PragerU?
I sure did say PragerU.
This isn't making sense to me. And they looked at me and said, "Oh, you're cis," and started to giggle, which I had never even heard that term. So I had gone to the parent course that was offered by the school to understand, what are they teaching these kids? And in that course, I was given an 8x11 sheet of all the different gender identities, demi-boy, non-binary, all these terms that were senseless to me. And many of the parents were sitting there just shaking their heads, going along. And my hand just kept shooting up, this doesn't make sense. I made it very clear. I don't believe anybody can change sex. I don't believe you are a boy. You will never be a boy. This is impossible. All this stuff is made up. They're taking advantage of you. They're lying to you. Who's making the money from this? You're getting fooled. Sue. I'm a lawyer. Sue. There's a lot of lawyers who are going to make a lot of money on this.
I hope so. I hope they sue. I hope they win. And I hope they make a lot of money off of it.
Who's making the money from this? You're getting fooled.
Well, that's convenient.
Helen Pluckrose, however, is also on the GenSpec advisory board. She has her own card. She's the author of the Counterweight Handbook, Principled Strategies for Surviving and Defeating Critical Social Justice Ideology, and the co-author of Cynical Theories, How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why This Harms Everybody. She's also the founder of Counterweight, which we can't find a lot anymore online about this, so we're not sure if it's still really in existence, but she referred to as an emergency triage organization to support people encountering problems ranging from indoctrination, censorship, disciplinary action, firing, or social cancellation due to ideological bias in their workplace. And Carrie Clark, who is also on our card over here, was one of the co-coordinators for Counterweight. And they have done things such as had charity workers get in touch who were concerned funds were being diverted from helping vulnerable people to being used for diversity training.
It is just one of the many players in the culture wars.
Here, put her on up there.
All right, let's go, Helen. But we've got to make room for her other BFF.
Oh, we'll get there. So Helen is also friends and co-colleagues with James Lindsay. James Lindsay, he regularly shares conspiracy theories about the supposed communist takeover of the world, especially the United States, promotes groomer rhetoric against the LGBTQ community, and spreads the white genocide theory that Marxists want to eradicate the white race. So if anyone has ever heard of the Great Replacement theory, that's also a theory that Tucker Carlson promotes and was originally, I think, referenced by David Duke, the leader of the KKK.
Yeah, and it's been used even before that in history.
Yes.
I have a quote from James Lindsay.
Please share a quote.
From May 5th, 2022. Social emotional learning is the hypodermic needle that injects identity, Marxist social theories into our kids.
Yeah, he's also referred to the rainbow flag as the flag of the hostile enemy. Abigail Schreier is an author who is also on the advisory board and who wrote Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze, Seducing Our Daughters. She also wrote a book called Bad Therapy that has been kind of going around in like popular. It's a trendy book to read right now. And then finally, Rachel Rooney, a Gen Spect advisory board, who is also an author. And Juniper put a picture of J.K. Rowling instead of Rachel Rooney.
I swear I Googled Rachel Rooney and that picture came up, and I obviously don't know what J.K. Rowling looks like.
It's perfect irony because of all the stuff that we're talking about. We got J.K. is probably BFFs with all these people too, based on her views, her publicly stated views. But this is not Rachel Rooney. This is J.K. Rowling. But Rachel Rooney has written a book for children called My Body Is Me. And that book was published by Transgender Trend.
So think that we can come in and share some updates. And
yeah, because we got some
big changes in Gen Spect. They have a new president, and their president is, and I am not sure how to pronounce their name.
How would you try to pronounce it?
Jennifer. Hold on one second. I'm going to look it up here, and then I'm going to look up my whole expose. Jennifer Lahl.
Lahl? Yeah. I think that's pretty.
Lahl. They have a new director of Gen Spect USA, Jennifer Lahl.
And what's her deal?
Well, essentially.
What's your deal, Jennifer? What's your deal?
Who are you and what's going on? So basically, they are most known for their books and films that they have produced. I say they because I'm just so used to being
I was actually
neutral.
Just wondering. I was like, man,
I'm so sorry.
Jennifer's probably gonna be real mad that you're using a they them pronoun.
As I've edited, I notice I say that a lot just
Which
because I'm
fine.
so used to it.
Yeah, but you know,
so
Jennifer probably doesn't love that. If that's an educated guess, Jennifer, if that's not true, you can debunk me.
And actually, I want to be respectful of how Jennifer wants to be referred
Sure.
to, and I will take accountability for possibly misgendering Jennifer. Yeah, I don't want to do that to anyone.
No.
That is not cool. And so anyhow, see how I can be compassionate and caring without pushing agendas?
I appreciate that about you.
Okay. So prior to her filmmaking and writing career, she was a pediatric critical care nurse. And she was also involved in senior level management in the hospital. So that's her medical background. And the focus on most of her work has been assisted reproductive technologies.
Oh, like IVF?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me just read to you.
I know that's not the only assisted reproductive technology. By
there's a bunch.
I just wanted to make sure I was on the right page.
You are. So her main stances are that IVF should be banned, that stem cell research should be banned, that surrogacy should be banned. And the way that Jennifer talks about that is that it is a form of human trafficking.
What? That is a take. That is a take. That is an opinion that she has.
So, exploitation. is the film that really gets into this
Exploitation.
surrogacy issue that this person has. And it investigates the dangers and exploitation faced by women who donate eggs for fertility treatments or scientific research. So her whole thing is that these women are exploited, aka trafficked in a way, because they're being used for some cause of like
for their eggs. So let me make sure, maybe you're not the one to answer this question.
I did not watch the movie. Future Juniper jumping in here. Spoiler alert. I have watched portions of some of these documentaries and also some interviews with Jennifer Law, and going to share a few clips right now. And the clip that I'm going to share right now, just to give the listeners and viewers a little peek into why the argument even exists that assisted reproductive technologies are unethical or exploitative. Exploitative, is that a word? Yes. Or should be argued against.
I want to get into sperm donation, as they call it, and IVF and surrogacy. But before that, the underlying principle that I think the whole fertility industry is built on is the idea that we're owed or we have the right to pursue a child at pretty much any cost, provided we can afford it. And what's your take on that? Because in the pro-life movement, obviously we highly value children. They're human beings. They have equal rights to us, and we want to protect them. Adults should sacrifice for children. Big fertility is really focused on the adult or the couple wants a child, and so they'll go through many measures and great expense to pursue a child. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anybody has a right to a child. I certainly don't agree anybody has a right to another person's body in order to have a child. So the whole area of third-party conception using egg and or sperm vendors, surrogate wombs, I strongly oppose that.
Meaning the adult doesn't have the right to another adult's body. Obviously, if you're the child in the womb, this is your parent. You have the right to that nourishment. But I don't have the right to someone else's egg or sperm or children myself as an adult.
Exactly. And so my husband and I, we have 4 children. Those are our children. We have a right to those children. They came out of our bodies. I gave birth to them. Those are our children. But I don't have a right to go to, if I had a sister and say, will you give me your eggs, or a girlfriend who, will you carry my baby to term for me because I can't. And we don't have a right.
Okay. So Jennifer here is describing the root of, if you want to call this a debate or maybe an ethical argument, is who has the right to have a child in this instance? Who has the right? Who is in charge of who and what? And I think this is very telling to why Jennifer Law has gotten involved with the opposition of gender-affirming care. Oh God. So she is
the look I saw.
She is the founder of the CBC, which is the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network.
That sounds sus as fudge.
Yes, me.
Well, it sounds like are we ready for it? Here we go. Dog whistle.
Woo! Good throwback.
It sounds like a dog whistle. It sounds like something that would sound totally innocuous on the surface, but also sends this message to people who are in the know that, like, I have these weird radical beliefs the same you do, so come on in. Whereas people that don't have that belief would just it would just kind of like skate on by if you're not listening for it, because it sounds, again, like generally like neutral and innocuous, but bioethics and culture is a total dog whistle for people who have extreme right-wing beliefs that they're like, oh, those are my people in that group. Like, right. That's for me. That's for me. We're all going to secretly join together under this headline of this like really boring kind of sounding headline title. My God.
We are women and men of diverse ethnic, religious, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds from all regions of the world. We come together of our shared concern for women and children who are exploited through surrogacy, contract, pregnancy arrangements. We believe that surrogacy should be stopped because it is an abuse of women's and children's human rights. Hey, remember when you said, save that little blurby for later?
Mm-hmm.
Save that little blurby for later.
Save it for later, for sure.
An abuse of women's and children's human rights. We believe that the practice of commercial surrogacy is indistinguishable from buying and selling of children. Oh,
I knew it
like
was
adoption?
going there.
Sorry. We stand together asking national governments of the world and leaders and international community to stop surrogacy now. This is one of the prime issues and platforms that this person has been advocating for decades.
That is a wild hill to die on. Oh my gosh.
Breeders, a subclass, explores ethical issues and personal stories surrounding surrogate motherhood, commodification of women's bodies. Now, let's make a little guess of why Jennifer Law, who has spent most of her career arguing against basically all fertility that's not all natural, if you want to put it of sorts. I mean, what would you say? Like
anything other than straight up PMV?
Yeah. If it's not PMV, then so this is what I'm guessing. How did that person come to find themselves as the new director of GenSpect?
I think it probably has something to do with saving the children.
Okay, so this next clip that we're going to share is Jennifer being welcomed as the new president of GenSpect and sharing a little bit about how and why she got involved in GenSpect in the first place.
And a lot of the work I have done in the past has been in the area of assisted reproduction. And what I found out before they block puberty, they offer children what they call fertility preservation. Freeze and bank your egg or sperm or your testicular tissue if you don't have sperm yet, or your ovarian tissue if you don't have eggs yet. And that's when we decided as documentary filmmakers to get into this space of gender, I guess, medicine in scare quotes, because I was really...
Oh, wow. This is a new one. Gender medicine in scare quotes. Oh my God, I've never heard scare quotes. I'm going to use that one, Jennifer, because I get a jump scare when I hear this type of dialogue.
Concerned with how can doctors be offering this, knowing what I know about assisted reproductive technology and infertility.
It always comes back to saving the children in this weird way, because if you really want to save the children, there's a lot of things you could do. Children are being blown up in Gaza. It's always save the white children.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. But since she decided that she needed to bring her perspective to the gender quote unquote debate, she has 3 new films. I mean, prolific.
That's quite a it takes a long time to make a film, ostensibly, correct? I'm not a filmmaker. So
I don't know. Some people call their YouTube videos films, but anyhow, I took a few screen grabs from the documentary Exploitation, and I'd like to use that in scare quotes, documentary, because of course documentaries do this and it is part of media and how you tell a story, but it's like the music and the way the footage is done. Classic.
How can we continue to ask young women to assume such a burden? Shouldn't we do all that we can to preserve their health and well-being and safeguard them from abuses? How can we demand hormone-free organic food and water and yet pump young women full of risky hormones? As older women, can we in good conscience ask them to potentially sacrifice their future fertility for our desire to have a child?
When I first introduced this new director from GenSpect, Laurel and I hadn't really heard a lot about this person because we're not like deep into the world of anti-assisted reproductive technology. However, we do feel that it makes perfect sense, this, if you want to call it a bioethics or medical ethics debate, that it would be brought into gender-affirming care conversations. And the common thread really, in our view, is around restricting bodily autonomy. Who has the right to one's body and the choices and decisions that one makes around their body? Who, what age, who makes the decisions? This is really at the heart of the matter. Law's argument about ART, assisted reproductive technology, and her general stance on gender-affirming care both really hinge on the idea that people should not have control over their own reproductive and bodily choices, especially if those choices deviate from a very narrow view of biological essentialism. She argues that if someone cannot conceive naturally, big scare quotes there, they shouldn't have a child at all. And her argument around trans identity is that she supports the idea that if someone's experiencing gender dysphoria, they should not transition, but should instead undergo exploratory therapy to align with their biological sex, which makes perfect sense because that's the GenSpect approach or thought process, again, which means that that's therapy first and gender exploratory therapy's thought process. So, really, both arguments frame certain human experiences like infertility and trans identity as problems that should be accepted as unchangeable rather than as conditions or as lived experiences that can be ethically addressed with medical care. Again, there's some threads of medical gatekeeping. Of course, law and organizations like GenSpecs use medical and ethical language to create an illusion of objectivity, but their core goal is restriction, in my view, not patient well-being. It's so interesting, this use of the words natural, like natural reproduction or natural gender. In my view, one of the key, most hypocritical points in Law's rhetoric is that she argues for one kind of biological determinism. If someone can't conceive naturally, she believes they should simply accept that reality. They don't have the right. Jennifer wouldn't understand this because she has 4 children, so it doesn't affect her. It's not a problem for her. So why and how could it ever be a problem for somebody else? And that's a whole other thread of these people that don't have lived experiences trying to make decisions for others. Okay. Told myself I would stay calm during this update. Now, she opposes gender affirming care because she believes in the natural order of sex. If someone does not align with their assigned sex at birth, they should accept that reality. So, in both cases, she really assumes that biology is destiny and that any deviation from it should not be allowed, even if medical intervention could improve quality of life. And I'm just curious, as a previous nurse, what medical interventions that she approves of that is, ethical or that people have the right to. The real world impact of her advocacy is denying people choices over their own bodies and futures, essentially. She assumes women engaging in ART are being exploited rather than making informed choices. Does that sound familiar? She assumes that trans people, particularly youth, are being manipulated rather than expressing their real experiences. And this is a very paternalistic approach that almost like erases individual agency, individual autonomy. It suggests that individuals can't be trusted to make their own medical decisions, which I just to be clear, the new president of GenSpect USA is towing the party line about pathologizing natural human diversity like infertility or trans identity, positions medical intervention as dangerous interference rather than care, and strips individuals of the right to make their own reproductive and bodily decisions. Okay, back to our original conversation. Jennifer Law has connections with several conservative, religious, and gender-critical organizations. For example, she has collaborated with groups like the Alliance for Defending Freedom, a Christian legal organization. She's spoken at events hosted by the Heritage Foundation, which we know is a conservative think tank behind Project 2025, on issues like surrogacy. And guess what I did? I almost tried to watch it. It was her and some other person. I tried to, and I got like 5 minutes in. I was like, I'm going to have to save this. Her Heritage Foundation speech was entitled Casualties of Surrogacy, Women for Rent and Infants for Sale, LGBT Rights for Hijacking. That's a lot there. That's why.
It's so interesting also to me as a side note that whenever, or like a lot of times folks in these like realms still put the T in the LGBT. Sometimes they won't. They'll sometimes say like LGB, right? But when they put the T, it is really fascinating to me. And I'm not really sure why they do that. Because they're obviously like not inclusive of trans people.
Yeah.
So like, why are they putting the T? And like, for example, in several folks' bios on the Therapy First website, they use the acronym LGBT. Now they don't go beyond the T. Yeah. It's not like LGBTQ or any others, but many instances I've found where they include the T in the acronym. And I just don't understand why.
Well, it could be like, for example, one of their board members who is a trans man.
Right.
It could be that some members of the organization, and as we learned when we discussed Lisa Marciano and those other people, that they say, oh, well, it does exist very rarely.
But like barely.
Yeah, they'll say
barely
in
ever.
very, very rare instances, there is possibly a transgender identity. And even the people that are trans that work within that agency, we just started looking into the newest person that they have. And I can't read a lot about their positions. I might just reach out to them and find out because I want to know as a fellow mental health professional. But yeah, so I'm thinking that maybe that's either A, because there might be a divergence within the group, but B, what we probably would say is the most likely is to come across as neutral, benign,
right.
accepting.
Yeah, I think that's probably, to me, that seems the most logical explanation, given all that we've found so far. But it is just very interesting to me.
It's interesting because, and we're going to talk about this as clinicians, but we understand that there is just a plethora, a variety of lived experiences and ways that people express and understand their lived experience. We can be aware that like, yeah, it makes sense that a lot of people might conceptualize these in lots of different ways, but to align yourself in the organization that is so clear and concise of how they view, I'm just curious of how those differences of opinion might play out behind the scenes. Laurel, we got through the organizations and the people involved with them.
That was a lot. And you know what? We still could talk more about it.
Oh, I was going to say, we didn't even hit half the people that we researched. We're not noting these people because we just want to snark them. We'll do that privately. Laurel and I will do that privately. And also I will do it anonymously via Reddit. Okay. I'm not going to do that publicly, but I think it was really important to go through the organizations and people because, as we mentioned, we are mental health professionals. We provide mental health education. We are concerned with this information being out there, getting CEU credits. So for us, part of going into this was to provide people with information so you can make your best decision and judgment. We're not telling people what to think and believe. We are sharing our personal thoughts and beliefs and how we practice. We're sharing this because we do find connections between gender exploratory therapy and conversion therapy. And we're going to get more into that in part 3 when we produce evidence. And we also talk about history, politics, culture wars, and some of the underlying fuel to the fire, should we say.
I would say that's a good way to put it.
Yes.
It is concerning.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's, I believe, is concerning. And so it's sharing information. And I think it's important to share our concerns as professionals to advocate for oppressed people groups. There is a power dynamic potentially at play. And if there are people in professional spaces who are potentially doing harm, I think it's important to share the information that we believe it is harmful.
Absolutely.
And advocate for those people who are not in that professional space and are in a different place in that power hierarchy.
Absolutely.
Whether we want it to be true or not. So as a part of this series, we wanted to do something a little bit extra. So we will also put a link in the show notes where you can purchase some merch that we have designed. We will show them here. And with these specific designs, when you purchase them, 100% of the proceeds are going to go to Advocates for Trans Equality. Advocates for Trans Equality is an advocacy and support organization that does all kinds of different work around trans rights and human rights, litigation, organizing, policy, voter engagement, name change project, ID documents, legal services. So we really want to support those folks who are on the ground in the game doing that really important advocacy work. We would love if you would do something nice for yourself and buy a little piece of merch, and then that money will go to a good cause. And of course, if you just want to donate to Advocates for Trans Equality directly, we will put their link in the show notes as well. And you can absolutely do that. And we do encourage you to do that.
I would also like to invite folks to share, comment. What thoughts do you have? Are your flags being raised? Do you also feel similar concerns that we feel when learning about some of the practices of these organizations?
Tell us what you think.
And not because we want the algorithm to love us.
No, although it would be kind of nice if other people who might benefit from this information were able to access the information. And we all know how the algorithm works. So please, as always, feel free. We would love it if you would give us a rating and a review, or a like and a subscribe, because the algorithm is real and it does affect who gets to see and hear this.
Yes. Thank you.
Right, well, I'm gonna eat some snacks.
I know. I'm gonna eat. I put like a lot of nuts are out here. Juicy apricots. I just want to rebel right now against. I'm not putting this on here, but I want to be like, get a fucking grip, y'all.
Take a seat.
Yeah,
It'll be okay.
Yeah, content.
You'll still be able to do therapy.
Yeah.
You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this.